Zionism is such a powerful force in this country that any president, any conceivable president in the foreseeable future, just simply can't take it on directly. You just can't.
How do we know? Nobody's tried. Nobody. I just
Well,
feel it's hard for me to imagine that it's still that powerful. You know, I sometimes feel like Zionism is similar to the deep state. We never really were kind of aware of it. There was people on the fringe chattering about it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And then when Trump came along, we started to really see the deep state. And that's what brought down the deep state. And I kind of feel like that's what's happening now with Zionism and in Israel. A lot of people were just kind of just superficially aware of what was happening there. They don't really pay attention. It's like, oh yeah, they're throwing a lot of rocks and shooting rockets at each other. They're a little crazy. And now what's happened since October 7th, the reaction is it's just been going on so long that it's hard for people to look away. And they're starting to see like, well, what is this Zionism? And they're starting to explore and understand like, hey, I don't really support this. This isn't really America. First of all, it's not America first. This is something that Trump really campaigned on. And then we have this huge glaring exception with everything that he said he was campaigning about. A lot of the MAGA movement was built on. And I think we are seeing some people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and, people within the Republican Party are saying like, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we bombing Yemen? Why are we antagonizing Iran? This isn't in our national, security interest. This isn't in the best interest of America. It's not America first. And the more that we continue to support Israel, I think more and more the tentacles of Zionism in U.S. government is becoming apparent. People are always talking about AIPAC now. People are talking about the ADL. People are talking about, the anti-Semitism and the suppression of free speech. That was a huge part of the conservative movement and MAGA movement is talking about freedom of speech. But it's like, but you can't criticize Israel. That's starting to become an exception. And it's a real problem now. And it's a little scary. So I just feel like the longer that this goes down, more and more people are becoming disenchanted with the concept of Zionism and an Israel first foreign policy. So I think someone should try. I think the next president, someone should try that platform and see if it works. And even if they don't win, I think the Israeli lobby guns will be pointed so openly at this person that everybody will be like, okay, yeah, we know who really runs the U.S. government now. And then it's over. It's exposed, and people will vote him out, right? That's my belief.
Yeah. Well, no, there's quite a bit to what you say. But first, I think I have to maybe, again, temper your expectations or maybe correct a couple of things he said. The deep state has not been defeated. It's taken a blow. For example, again, that bright light that was shined on USAID, that was a real blow to the deep state. And you find out now there are investigations being conducted in countries around the world. Say, wait a second, what have these people been doing? I think there are always voices in these different countries, most recently in Kazakhstan. But it was, criticisms were made, accusations were made, but they were often disregarded or people had trouble believing, but that these accusations were true. But now when the U.S. government itself, reveals that they're true, that really strengthens let's say the pro-sovereignty, pro-multipolar forces around the world. So that's significant. It is a blow to deep state plans, but the deep state is still there. Just like I was telling you about the negotiation team, about the embassy restaffing. The Russians sat down and they saw the same faces on the other side. Hey, they're not gone. Remember, there are a lot of people, these government departments are huge. And yeah, they've taken some blows, but still, by and large, the State Department is the State Department. And, that's one of the centers of the deep state. And the CIA is still the CIA and so on and so forth. So, it's not over. And then, let's see, what else should I think? Oh, well, just talking about Israel. Yeah, okay. There's no question about it that there's a skepticism and actually an opposition to Zionism that now exists that didn't exist before, but it just hasn't made its way into the corridors of power. One thing is like you point to like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay, yeah, she's asked real questions about her, and kudos to her for that. But she is not representing the Republican Party, unfortunately. She's actually an outlier, and I think that that has to be recognized. But at least, okay, we did have outliers in the past too. Going back to the 70s, 80s, there were the occasional Republicans that really spoke up. Actually, way back then, more often in the Republican Party than the Democratic Party. So, yeah, this. I think that, as we've said many times, actually, that the days of Zionism are numbered. That especially what's taken place since October 7th really has revealed Zionism's ugly face to the world. And that is having an impact all around the world, including in the US. But you're not seeing it reflected yet, within the corridors of power. Now, I guess what you're arguing, and I think this is reasonable, is that, well, as the reality shifts kind of under our feet, we get more and more young people in particular that are becoming highly critical of Israel, mostly on the left, but also on the right. Eventually that will be reflected in the corridors of power, but it's not yet. And it's nowhere near to it yet. When you look at the money, you look at the commanding institutions of the culture, of the media, they're all firmly Zionist. Now, and both parties are. It's bipartisan. If you have a vote on something like what's happening in Yemen, it's going to be like the number of people that are going to oppose it you probably can count them on the fingers of one hand or maybe two hands. I don't know. This is what we're looking at. This is still the truth. And yeah, it's also in the past, okay, it's not like nobody has ever taken on the Zionists, maybe not directly, but indirectly. The George Bush Sr., say one of the reasons, and some people argue the reason that he lost his election to Clinton, why he wasn't reelected back in 1992, was that he actually suspended loan guarantees to Israel. And that set off alarm bells among, the various within the Israel lobby and all their supporters in the media, and they really went after him tooth and nail. And he pointed that out apparently even to his son. It's like, you don't cross them. There is this real fear, which is based on real history, of congressmen and presidents that have tried to cross the Israel lobby, even in very minor ways, but they just come down hard. And now look at Trump. Okay, yeah, Trump is, like we've said, he's maybe the kind of guy that does it. It's not. I think people make a mistake about Trump, thinking that he's crafty and he's playing 5-dimensional chess and all that. I don't think anything's true. Sometimes he's very effective and he does things that nobody else did, but it's not because it's because of his intellectual power. It's just raw kind of emotion and just brashness, fearlessness. He says the things that you're not supposed to say. And we found that, because, I think politicians in both parties say, oh, you can never say this. But they've been taught that, by the people around them and by previous politicians. And then he went out and said it, and the sky didn't fall. And that's really changed things. And again, we see it happening. That's part of what we see happening with regard to Russia. But I think he would have a reason to believe the sky would fall if he went directly after Israel. Like, he is surrounded by, Zionist extremists. He is funded by Zionist extremists. And, he can give his, I was just thinking the other day, like when he gave his address to Congress, he got all kinds of applause. But if he went directly after Israel, I don't think anybody would stand up, or maybe 2 or 3 people on the whole. It's a whole different kettle of fish here. So yeah, maybe that day is not so far off as we like to think. Maybe it's just a few years down the road, but I don't think we're there yet where you can actually take them on directly. That's my own feeling, but sometimes we can be surprised.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to fully grasp that, because part of the appeal of somebody, for a lot of people, for someone like Trump or Elon Musk, is the fact that they're billionaires. They're so rich that they can't be owned by anybody, that they're their own people. But apparently that's not true. It seems like they're still owned. How for me, it's like, how can $100 million from Miriam Adelson buy that much influence with somebody that's a billionaire? You know, when you're dealing with people like Trump or Musk, but they're Zionists as well. Like, why? It's like, why? You have all the money in the world. You can be your own man. And, you know, he has voiced sentiments before about like these wars in the Middle East are pointless, a huge waste of money. He posted that video of Jeffrey Sachs where he called Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch and trying to get us in war with Iran. Then 2 months later, he's talking about basically, hey, Iran, don't do anything. Don't fund the Houthis. Don't give them any support while we continue to funnel money and weapons into Israel so they can do whatever they want, or funnel money and weapons into Ukraine, basically all over the world. You know, just the hypocrisy of it is just laid bare. So I just, it's hard for me to see why that's the case. I feel like Trump has, you know, he has kind of a cult following. He has the ability, I think, to do things that previous presidents weren't able to do. If he really pushed against it, and he has a megaphone that, you know, that I think can't be suppressed. You know, they obviously tried to suppress him, and it didn't work. So I feel like if he wanted to, he can. But I guess it's comes down to that it's a deep-seated sentiment that he loves Israel, and he supports what they're doing.
Right.
Do you think that's really what it is?
Right.
I mean,
Well,
how can you support that? Like, it says he's a man of peace, and he seems to be a man of peace when it comes to Russia. But how can he not be when it comes to the Middle East at all?
Well, I think Israel is often the great exception. I mean, it was something that the progressives, you know, the leftists talk about. They refer to people progressive, PEP, progressive except Palestine. But then you can also say that on, you know, I think especially these days on the populist right, you know, you're all about sovereignty and, like, you know, America for the Americans, France for the French. But then when it comes to Zionism, you know, that sovereignty, you know, your own interests go out the window, and you end up just subordinating your own nation's interests to Israel. Israel is a great exception to everything. You know, that's the sad truth. It's hard to find people in either party, you know, in either on the left or the right, that really can't escape that.